What is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me my two great co-hosts, Federico Perez and Ralph. And guys, here we are. It is March. It is finally the month of World Cup qualifiers. Obviously, big games happening in the Copa Libertadores, the Sudamericana, and in different competitions. Also, the league is really heating up in terms of the Apertura. So there's a lot to talk about, and there has been a lot to talk about in this last week. As we go into Fede first, because Fede, obviously here we are in the month of March. We're literally 13 days away from the big game against Chile at the Defensores del Chaco. There are a lot of people also expectant of what Gustavo Alfaro will make of his squad, because really we're in a situation that by the end of this month, if all goes well, Paraguay will be back at the World Cup. And that's something that this time last year would have been unimaginable, or even a couple of months ago. But it's really getting close. We'll talk about that next week when we do our big World Cup qualifier preview for the games against Colombia and Chile. But man, it's really, the anticipation is heating up. I don't know about you guys, but I'm really feeling it. I'm going to Paraguay in a couple of days as well for that game, and I'm really looking forward to it. But man, it's really expected, and it all starts with that squad list that anytime Alfaro was going to announce.
I feel your excitement, man. Yeah, obviously. Who doesn't want to come to the country, watch their national team, especially now that we're winning, now that we're on our winning streak and it looks like we're going to the next World Cup. I think it's gonna be packed, the Defensores de Chaco again. Tickets are selling like crazy. People want to see this team. We're gonna miss a couple of players for the game against Chile. We have that revenge, right? We kind of want to see Chile again after what happened in the last qualifiers, and we want to do it with quite style, I would even say. Hopefully, building on something special like we saw last year from Gustavo Alfaro and the boys. We'll talk about it probably more in depth on the next episode when we have the full list. Right now, we're looking into certain players that might be called up. There could be new names, new players being called up, but we saw Gustavo Alfaro go through Europe, go through Brazil, talk to most of the players that have already been called up. So you're thinking like the base of players is already there. Most of the guys know that they're going to be on this list, but there's always one, two, maybe even three spots still open for new players, especially from the ones that are coming up, the young guys, right? The under 20s. We've seen very good stuff from them lately, and I think some of them have been able to take a leap outside of the country, go to other places, and they could be in an opportunity. We're going to talk about, obviously, was what we saw in Sudamericana, because the Sudamericana started for the Paraguayan teams also. Libertadores is still going on for Cerro Porteño. They're just one game away from the group stage. It looks really well from them, at least in the Libertadores, in the international stage, not in the Apertura, where other teams are really fighting in their chances. So, yeah, looking forward to talk about it, just like we do every week here in Guarani Vision. Ralph, Roberto, love to be back for another episode.
Up to be back for another episode, indeed, Ralph. And yeah, like Fede said, I think there is that anticipation. The fact that tickets have been sold out. It has literally been sold out for, I think, weeks or not even months. So it really is that big anticipation, Ralph, because I think, certainly there has always been this sort of attention given to Paraguay. At the minute, we talk to a Paraguay team that made it to the Beach World Cup, for example. They just qualified. Finishing up as fine as runners up. They lost to Brazil, but still, Paraguay is doing so well in all disciplines of football that now, with this kind of game happening against Chile at home and then traveling to Colombia in a couple of days after, there is that sort of, big anticipation. And you look at even some of the players that we're seeing, you had mentioned Libertadores and Sudamericana. We see what we saw from the U20, and it's going to be interesting to see who does make this really privileged squad that could indeed become the first Paraguay team to make the World Cup in 16 years. It's a lot of pressure, anticipation, and I think also excitement. Just the way that there is this sort of vibe that's changed in the last few months.
Yeah, I think that's a good word to use, excitement. So I'm excited. Hi, everybody watching, listening. It's the game went on sale. Actually, the 3 remaining home games went on sale on December 24th, Christmas Eve, which is basically Christmas for Paraguayans. And I saw some people writing to me recently asking how they can get tickets, and it was like, you can't unless you want to go in the Chile section. But not just for this Chile game, like all 3 games are sold out. So I mean, such is the hype now that everybody is looking forward to this, and it is more excitement. I feel it's not the weight of expectation like you feel like Cerro players are feeling at the moment when they're like, you have to do something for us. It's more like people really are riding the wave and very positive about what's been going on. And like you said, like all the little complementary pieces are falling in with the under-20s, the Beach World Cup. Now you got the under-17s tournament starting soon. And like, let's be honest, Paraguay will probably qualify because of the expanded format, which means I think 7 of the 10 teams go through or something. So you're feeling suddenly that everything's moving into place and building up on the pitch with what's going on. So yeah, it's an exciting time. I mean, let's just get into those games. I really want to see those and see how it develops next week. No, 2 weeks, right? We're just 2 weeks away.
Yeah, 2 weeks away from the game, but of course next week we'll have a really big preview show for those two games, so keep an eye on that. And really, yeah, it is also finishing the job. They need to finish the job to make that journey. As now we move on to our first topic, to a team that also needs to finish their job next week. It's Cerro Porteño. Now, I'm gonna go to Fede on this one first because it's a Cerro side that, you know, it's such a roller coaster watching Cedro play, and that doesn't change anything in regards to how they perform, and sometimes, you know even when morale is low, they kind of try to go and bounce back. It's inconsistent, but they were able to go to Peru, and really the big journey to Peru as a whole, the fact that they had these issues with the plane getting from Venezuela, and going into this sort of issue, you felt that something was gonna go wrong when they go into that game, but eventually it didn't. It didn't. Cerro Porteño ended up winning 1-0. They won on the day to win the first leg over there in Atahualpa and against Melgar. Really weird game. Cecilio Dominguez missing a penalty in the 22nd minute. Piris Damota scoring the follow-up penalty in the 34th minute, and then they just were able to ride, I guess, the sort of momentum in a way to get the result. And you need to get these sort of results in the Libertadores. But just for me, it kind of surprised me, just everything that happened beforehand. But they proved me wrong.
They have proved everybody wrong just one more time in Libertadores, right? I mean, it's just a totally different team. In Libertadores, you see them handling the game differently. They did really well, I believe, against Melgar. You just mentioned all the problems they had to get to Peru, traveling at night, the same day of the game. How crazy was that for players not to be able to sleep, get the rest like they should have? And then you had the altitude also being a factor there in Peru. That was something that was gonna eventually come back to the players. You saw that in the second half. They had the trouble. They had to defend. Thankfully, they got that goal in the first half. It was a weird game, just like you said, Roberto, because 2 penalties as the away, being the away team, that doesn't usually happen in South America in CONMEBOL competitions. But yeah, we got to talk about Cecilio Dominguez. I think he's had about 4 penalties so far this year. He's missed 2 already. He has not looked in his best form. He has not looked confident. And maybe it's time to take the penalties away from him. Maybe it's time to give the penalties to Robert Piris Damota, who got the second penalty after Iturbe got through the goalkeeper, and he was held back, and they got a second opportunity in that first half, and thankfully they put that game on their side. And I think it's just a great result. I mean, to take it back, bring it back to Paraguay, in front of their fans. You guys remember the atmosphere that we had last time around. Cerro Porteño played in Libertadores the last leg, and hopefully that kind of starts shifting, right? I think fans gotta separate things. One thing is the Apertura. Another thing is what this team is doing in Libertadores. They're really close to the group stage. And I think it's time for Cerro Porteño, the fans, the players, they need to come together, because we've been seeing some really weird stuff from the players. We've heard really weird stuff from the coach also. They have not been able to unite, in what needs to be a very good Libertadores for them. It is expected for a big team like Cerro Porteño, to be in the group stage. That's why fans are saying Melgar is nothing for us. Monagas is a small little club in Venezuela. That's just, how the fans see it, but you still got to play. And Melgar hadn't lost a single game in 2025. So to me, look at the positive side of it. Roberto Fernandez had a really good game. Gatito, who had been really criticized these last couple of starts, and you had Gustavo Velasquez coming back to center, as a center back, and I thought he was really good there alongside Matias Perez. They had so much to do in the second half because it really looked like it was going to be a tie. I mean, Melgar had several opportunities in the second half to also tie it. And if they would have tied it, maybe they would have had enough push also to win it at home. So thankfully, it was a really good result for Cerro Porteño. I'm looking at the bright side of this thing. Robert Pires de Mota was not a starter at the beginning of the season. The coach saw that he needed something in that midfield, and he brought him in. And he's not taking him out again because he's been one of the best midfielders, no doubt about it. He's pushing everybody around. I think a lot of players can still play much better. He's changing up the team constantly. I think that's kind of, for the players, it's got to be like, am I a starter? What am I to this coach? What's going on here? But Diego Martinez is trying to have everybody healthy, have everybody 100% because they're not. They came back now to the country after playing this game, and they got to travel again to the countryside. They got to go play General Caballero, so it's not easy for them. I think the calendar is just so tied up. Games are starting to stack up for Cerro Porteño, but they're just one game away from the group stage, Ralph. I'm looking at the positive side of this. I said it at the beginning of the season. Give Diego Martinez some time, and look what he's doing so far. Really good result, in my way of seeing it.
It was an incredible result, not just what you mentioned of two penalties that kind of gave it to them, but also the way they played, totally different, I think, to how we've seen them in much of the year so far. So he started with pretty much his normal attacking lineup, and he plays Pachi Carrizo, who's been out of kind of favor in the league because he's been playing Fariña, but he goes in with Carrizo, but he takes out Diego Leon because he knows he can't have Carrizo and Leon on the left side. It's just too exposed. So Benitez comes in, but he wants to have that attacking. So he puts Alan Nunez on the right back, another young fullback. And so he's thinking, okay, this way at least we'll still have some of that energy and some of that positiveness that's been like characteristic of his style so far. But then what's really interesting is the first shot on target in the whole game by Cerro is Cecilio's missed penalty. So for whatever they were trying to do attacking wise, and they did look quite good, but they weren't really generating anything until they get a break with the penalty. Like you mentioned, Cecilio misses it, but that actually really spurred the team on. I think they could have gone two ways, right? At that point, really, with everything that was building up, like we've just arrived on the day of the game because our directors have messed up with the plane situation. One of our best paid players has just missed a penalty again. So it could have been really a time to kind of cave in. Oh, and then Iturbe gets injured in the first half again. So he's been last time it was sickness. This time it looks like injury, but he's been very, very kind of injury prone. So there were all these things starting to go against them. And then they get the other penalty, which, by the way, was, for me, a very soft penalty. I don't think we mentioned that, but I mean, it was okay. They gave it, but I didn't feel it was as much of a penalty as what Melgar had a chance just before halftime, right? When there was a similar coming together in the box, and they didn't give it. But anyway, then I think you see a really important moment when Pires de Mota steps up. Like Fede was saying, he's been a very important player coming into this midfield, but he's a real character and a real leader. From what I've heard, just the rumors, right? But he's the reason John is not at the club, huh? Because he stood up to people like Jean Fernandez, and he didn't like that. And so as one, and it's who's going to stay, and it's Pires de Mota who stayed. And so he's a leader. He's not going to shy away from anything. And I don't know, we didn't see it on the pitch, but I'm sure he said something to Cecilio like, step away, you're not taking this. And he comes up, puts away the penalty, and suddenly Cerro are in front, and you felt like they had really done their job because their job was to score a goal and then try and defend. And that's where I said it was very different to what we've seen so far from Diego Martinez, because I think in the league, we would have seen him keep going to try and score again, and they concede late on. Remember, Cerro have conceded 3 or 4 stoppage time goals already this season. So it was very good to see them hang on, and play some of that kind of defensive and pragmatic football. And towards the end, there was just a lot of long balls coming from Gaston Jimenez. It was just trying to get the ball up to Chico da Costa and not really play anything pretty, but it was very effective. And I think that makes them a very interesting team for Copa Libertadores if they can start to be a bit more gritty, but also not play to their normal level or their normal style just to try and get results. So very positive for Cerro.
Now, heading into the second leg, obviously, I think, playing at home is always a game that is sometimes it could be it could deceive people in a way just because, oh, if you're at home, you obviously will have the advantage and it should go through. But I don't know, Ralph, you feel like, do you really trust this Edro side to do something in the second leg? I mean, they have been able to drop important results, even at home in the league, but is this sort of a situation where you feel as if though, yeah, Cedro can actually do finish the job just because they're so close. The fact that they're this close to the group stage, they got the result that they needed to do in Melgar. Is it for the taking? Surely they can't slip it up.
I think their record at home to Peruvian teams is generally much better than away, as you could imagine. So historically, I think actually the last two times Peruvian teams have visited, it's Pesero have won 1-0 and Pachicariza scored. I'll have to check that, but definitely in the last game against Alianza Lima at home. So you can see it could maybe be another tight game, but it's really set up now for Cerro to sit back and attack them on the break. That's where I think, by the way, Martinez could have done something better. He left Aguayo on the bench, and it would have been a good game, I thought, for Aguayo just to be kind of hitting them on the break. Delis Rodriguez is another player that could have come on and done that job. So I do think it really is in their favor because they know Melgar are going to have to try and score a goal. They know they'll get some space in behind. They have those players. It could be another game for Diego Leon actually in the second leg, right? Thinking about how they might end up playing with a bit more counter attack. So I really think it's set up well for them. And historically, they've usually done okay at home to Peruvian teams in terms of avoiding defeat. There's the crazy game against Garcilaso, which they lose under Chiquiase. It must have been Chiquiase, when otherwise they were unbeaten in the league, I think in 2013. But they lose that crazy game. But I think that's the only time they've lost at home to a Peruvian side. So you would expect they're going to have enough just to see it out.
You always expect with Cerro Porteño to just do it, right? I mean, they're on the driver's seat. They got the 1-0. Yeah, they got the advantage. They need to seal it up some way, somehow. I mean, they're a much better team than this Melgar. They have more quality. They have players that play on the national team. I expect them to get the job done at home. I expect them to put the fans by their side in the Libertadores. I think that's going to be huge for a good running of Libertadores. I don't see a championship team in Libertadores, to be honest with you guys, this far. But you never know what this team could end up being at the end of the year, right? So I'm giving the coach more time. I think players are starting to show their stuff. Just like I said before, I think there's a lot of players that can pick up their level. I haven't seen the best from Bruno Valdez. I have yet to see anything from Francisco Chico da Costa this year, who is usually getting a time also as one of the center forwards. I expect for Iturbe to pick up his stuff. I expect for Cecilio Dominguez eventually to be his best self again. Wilder Viera, this guy was playing for the national team last year, and he's coming and going off the team. So there's a lot of players, I believe, that can come back and be important in this team in their best version. But it's Melgar, and what I saw after the first game, I think Cerro can do it at home. I think for Cerro, the Sudamericana suits them better because of the team that they have, but it's a much better price in Libertadores. So stay in Libertadores. Get the job done at home and watch out for this team in the group stage. I think they can really mess up things for big teams, and maybe they can be one of those surprises. Nobody's expecting for Cerro Porteño to make it to the latter stages as of right now because even his coach is not totally confident on his team. You saw it. There was more than half an hour still left in the game, and he changed up the whole thing. No, we're going to defend now the lead, and we're just going to take this result home. So just like you're thinking, Roberto, no, you can't really rely on this team yet. And I get your doubts, but for me, I think they're going to get the job done.
The fact that they're so close, I think, kind of just makes it kind of reasonable. It's like, come on, guys, you're at home. You just took a 1-0 lead in Melgar. finish the job, like get to the group stage, and it's a huge economical boost. So yeah, and of course on the 17th, if they do make it, we'll have the draw, so we'll have them Olimpia and Libertad, and we'll see what they go into. So we don't want to really go, at least Fede, I don't want to go into like conclusions of like, oh, they could be a surprise team. We still need to wait to see if they can, one, to qualify, but two, also to see who they face. Because, it's always a tough opponent. It's always tough to face off these teams when you get into the group stage. So we'll have to wait and see. One team, two teams actually that do also have the fortune of going to the group stages of another competition is the Copa Sudamericana, Ralph, because we saw Sportivo Luqueño, or both teams, Sportivo Luqueño and Guarani, getting 2-0 wins against Ameliano and Do de Mayo, respectively. So you have those teams representative in the group stage. And, for Guarani, it's been an interesting sort of start, I guess, to 2025. So, having Chiqui Arce there and, going into a continental competition could give them some sort of kind of motivation. And and it's always going to be difficult when you look at the field that they have of the Brazilians, the Argentines, even some of the Colombians. But I think they could feel really good about making the group stage.
Yeah, I think for Guarani first, huge boost, because remember they're doing the whole stadium renovations, and to have this money in the bank, because you're guaranteed 6 games now in Sudamericana, that's really important for them. And it was an interesting game in that the first goal from Mendieta, what a great pass. I think it's from Mansour, that he takes out like 4 or 5 Dos de Mayo players with that pass, and Mendieta's on hand to finish. And then the last goal, we got to talk about that second goal, is one of the most bizarre goals I've seen, where the goal is now the last minute, right? And Dos de Mayo chasing to try and get something, force it to penalties. And the ball comes over the top, and Torales is through free. And the goalkeeper like comes out to meet him, and then instead of trying to tackle the ball, he like bunny hops, jumps over the ball. Like, I've never really seen anything like that before, where he just avoids everything. Like, he doesn't take the ball, he doesn't take the man, and like jumps over, and suddenly Torales is there with an open goal and puts it in. So that was really a strange moment from the Guarani game. But overall, I think let's go back to what we were saying at the very beginning in the preview, and we said Willy Mendieta and Fernando Fernandez could be the difference makers that Chiqui Arce needed to stop tying so many games and turn some of those into wins. And it's exactly what we're seeing, because they're pretty much similar team to last year, but just with that extra spark of quality that's seeing them take games and win matches. And now it's taken them to the Sudamericana, where I think it'll be a great challenge and a great task for Chiqui Arce. And then on Luqueño, what a huge result, because Luqueño Ameliano has become like almost like a mini Clásico between those teams, because of the time they met for the promotion relegation in 2021, and Ameliano were below in the intermedia, and they won the playoffs, and they got Luqueño relegated in their centenary year. So it became like a grudge. And then since then, Ameliano have always seemed to win. There's been like 1 or 2 Luque victories since they're both in Primera. So you looked at this game, and Luque have been doing so badly. They haven't won since November. You just thought, same thing, right? They're gonna trip up. They're gonna trip up. But then I think we finally saw some of the quality of some of their players. Ex-Emeliano player, Elvio Vera, and then the Dos de Mayo player, well, he's played in many clubs, but including Dos de Mayo last season, Brian Ayala, who's such a good player. And if people haven't seen that goal, they should go and watch that goal. I mean, he like slices through the whole defense, finishes really well, and puts Luqueño through. And that's really exciting, I think, as well, because Luqueño, such a good fan base. Being in continental competition, I think we can see some good crowds and some good games, depending on the teams they get, of course, but hopefully we'll see some good matches there.
I'm convinced with what I saw from Guarani, especially not so much from Luqueño. They ended up picking it up at the end of the game with that tremendous goal from Brian Ayala, even though Ameliano did not play their best football either in that game. But I mean, you could see in the players the way that they played. I mean, I'm not going to say it's all about the money, guys, but $900,000, I'm going to leave everything out there if that's how much I'm going to win, or at least if we're going to split it up, right? Because that's what actually happens. But there's a lot of money at stake in these kind of games. And now the format just takes you to this situation. Just one game. you had enough time to prepare because you knew who you were facing more than 2 months ago. So I think Guarani got prepared for their situation. I think Luqueño, obviously, they were not in the best form right now, but they really ran as much as they could. They left everything out there. And I think that's what Luqueño fans want to see from this team. I have not heard good things from their preseason. You can see that physically they are not up to shape. You can see that some players got to pick it up. But I mean, from the money side of it, it's a huge step. I mean, financially for these teams, it's a huge part of the budget of the year, and to keep the motivation going. And you had two teams that it was the first time that they ever played internationally. We're talking about Dos de Mayo and Ameliano. It was important for them, but they were not up to it. You know, sometimes in these kind of games where there's so much tension, where it's just 90 minutes or penalties, the experience, I believe, is important. And I kind of saw that, you know, from both sides. I think Luqueño was hungrier than Ameliano. They did really good in their game, and they got the fans by their sides. I mean, Guarani going through, Luqueño going through. This is spectacular from the show part of it, because we're gonna have a lot of people in the stands. Games are gonna be really exciting. Traditional teams are the ones that went through. There were no surprises the way that I saw it. I would have loved for Ameliano or for Dos de Mayo to go through because of what it could have meant for them, but it's over. The year internationally for them is over, and we got two teams now in the group stage. We'll see who they got to face off now. But for Guarani, I think they have a team that they can do something in the Sudamericana. What we're seeing so far in the Apertura, they have really good players. Juan Daniel Perez, has been playing really well as the right back. We're seeing the best from Willy Mendieta. He's been so important. Gaspar Servio, the leader in this locker room. So I'm really excited with what Guarani in particular can do in the Sudamericana. I want to see what happens with Luqueño. They got just one win so far. They needed that. They had so much weight on their shoulders, and they finally got some peace in that locker room. They were even players that were partying too much, apparently. That's why they were sanctioned a couple of weeks ago, but everything kind of fell into place right on time for this game, right? Elvio Vera was one of them, and he ended up being so important in this game. So Gustavo Mourinho has so many players available. Hopefully they can pick it up, because Luqueño is such a popular club. They have so much fans always behind them, no matter where they play. They don't have their stadium available, but they just keep on bringing so many fans in to all the stadiums. So I'm really happy for these two traditional teams that went through, Roberto. This is going to keep them on their toes, and this is going to keep both squads really motivated.
Totally, it absolutely will. As we shift gears now to another competition that's going on, another international competition occurring in South America. It is the U20 Copa Libertadores. Is actually happening in Paraguay. They're having games at the Estadio Carfem in Ipané and the Gunter Vogel in San Lorenzo. There was obviously some Paraguayan teams participating. You had Olimpia, who not had the best of starts at the moment. They drew one game against O'Higgins and they lose 6-1 to Flamengo. Cerro Porteño, the other team, they beat Independiente del Valle 3-2, and then they just lost to Palmeiras 3-0, which, you know, they're technically still in a position to qualify. But it was the incident that happened, Ralph. And, you know, again, it's something that, you know, you don't want to give Paraguay the attention it needs in terms of the negative side, because, you know, there's so much drama that already happens as a whole. But we did see an incident of racism. We saw, obviously, you know, a Paraguayan father and his son, you know, making offensive gestures to one of the Palmeiras players. He had, you know, spoke about it in an interview, and it obviously got a lot of attention on social media. But again, it's like one of those incidents that, you know, for a country that is desperately trying to get its reputation on the right foot for obviously the World Cup happening in 5 years' time, this is not the incident that they want to be well received of in Brazil, at least, and of course in all around the world.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's very sad because it comes after the last big tournament Paraguay hosted was the final of the Sudamericana, right? And everybody came back with such positive views on how, especially on the Paraguayan public, on how they had supported fans. It was a very hot day, and you know, they're giving water and well received and helping people. And that was the kind of positive image you want to give off. And so when you're hosting these tournaments, surely that's the side of the country you want to be proud of and want to show. You don't want to show some of the this kind of side of Paraguayan society, which is a problem. I mean, unfortunately, we can't call this an isolated incident. We were talking off camera, right? I mean, Paraguayan teams have been fined before by CONMEBOL for racist chants or racist gestures, usually from the fans, not players. Just to kind of make a separation here. This was very distinctly a single fan, not a group of fans either. But it's just not acceptable, right, at this level of football, and is even less acceptable when you're going to be host of a World Cup. And so it's a kind of thing. Of course, CONMEBOL have already come out with a statement. Cerro eventually came out with a statement, but it was very late. I don't understand why they could not have said something last night and they had to wait until this morning. But which maybe speaks to some of the, you know, the kind of reticence in Paraguay around racism and trying to really tackle it head on. Also from CONMEBOL, let's just remember, CONMEBOL so far have only ever fined people. They've never managed to really go far enough and actually suspend teams or look at, you know, points deductions or future suspensions from, you know, suspensions from future tournaments or that kind of thing. But also in Paraguayan society, I think, I mean, Luigi was so upset. Luigi was such a strong character, by the way, that he was not being asked about it in the post-game performance, because just to quickly go onto the pitch, Palmeiras were very good. They blew Cerro away in the first 15 minutes with 2 goals. Riquelme, who's been, I think he got an offer from Nottingham Forest last year. So, I mean, these are players that are really at a very high standard already. But he didn't want to talk about that at the end of the game. He said, how are you not going to ask me about what's just happened? How are you not going to ask me about what is a crime? He uses the word crime, which shows you just how the Brazilian perspective towards racism is so much more advanced in that kind of way compared to Paraguay, where honestly there's a lot of whataboutery and, oh yeah, but you did this, but and nobody really treats it as what it is, which is because it's not criminal in Paraguay, by the way. I don't think officially there's not like an anti-discrimination law. So you can just see the two sides of this, the two countries, there's such a big difference in that. And when we're speaking from the US, Roberto and I, right? Where's the person the country that needs to catch up is Paraguay. They have to accept that, right? They're on the wrong side of this. They need to catch up. They need to tackle this, be stronger. Cerro Porteño, if it happens at a game at any level where you're being represented, you have to be doing something stronger, not waiting until the next morning when you're hoping it's died down and put out a statement on your youth team channel and not on your main channel, which another thing as well. So not even on your verified account. So there's a lot to work on, I think. And it was just a sad thing, like we're saying, after there's so many nice things you want to talk about Paraguay, and you don't want this to be exposed or for this to even be happening. And then you have people in the stadium that somehow think this is acceptable with the baby in your arms. I mean, imagine what are you really showing your son or your son, I think it was, with that kind of behavior. It's just it's very upsetting, and let's see what CONMEBOL do, and let's hope they do something. Cerro are pretty much out of the tournament, but I think it has to go further than that. It's not really about just, you know, punishing one-off tournaments. Is more about creating that culture where you can make sure this doesn't happen in football stadiums.
Yeah, you hate it when these things happen, right? Especially in your own country when you're supposed to be the host country and you're supposed to welcome these kind of teams, and then you treat them this way. And especially because, just like Ralph was saying, I think we're under test every single tournament, every single game that's being played here. Let's not forget that the World Cup in 2030 will be played in Paraguay. So everybody's looking at us differently, just the way that everybody behaves also, and the security and how we solve these kind of issues. Hopefully there will be something out of this situation. But I've seen it so many times in Paraguay, in national team games, in club level. The thing is that this is a small tournament. There's not that many people in the stands. So the camera went right to the guy that was doing the gestures right in front of Luigi. I mean, he was just right behind him. And the situation just went too far. I mean, I understand from the Cerro Porteño fans maybe point of view that the players were also taunting at them, that they were doing gestures, but there's always a limit, and you can't do those kind of things, especially when there's so much campaigns going on from CONMEBOL, from FIFA. This has already been installed in people's heads. You can't do that anywhere, but especially in a football stadium nowadays. I think CONMEBOL has to go after this guy or go after everybody that does this kind of gestures. It's harder, obviously, when you got 50,000 people in the stadium doing something, but this is just one guy. So I think they need to make an example out of this thing, especially because Palmeiras is a big club. They're gonna put the pressure on this situation. They're not just gonna let go of it. We saw Felipe Melo even reacting to what happened. The video of Luigi crying and saying what he thought is going all over the place. Does not look good for CONMEBOL. That's why they reacted so quickly and they put out that statement. I want to see just how far this goes, Roberto. I think this is something to learn from, and hopefully the good guys are on the same side, and we can educate people for these things not to happen ever again. But unfortunately, I think it's just going to keep on happening. Racism is all over the world, and there's always people like this, but we got to take them away from football, at least.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I agree with everything that both you guys said. I think this is something that should not happen, and it's not normal. We should make this something that is normalized, and yeah, hopefully the authorities, be it the Paraguayans, CONMEBOL, whatever, are able to really tackle this down, because it's something that needs to be, no tolerance whatsoever. So yeah, hopefully that this incident is something that people can finally, obviously having this big hope on it, that can finally look to it. It's like, okay, we need to really tackle down, but we'll have to wait and see what happens from there as we close out to something a bit more cheerful, I would say. Obviously, the Paraguayans abroad, we had mentioned the squads being called up soon, because we're seeing a lot of great players performing well, Fede. We obviously saw in the this sort of Super Copa Argentina being played between River Plate and Talleres over there in La Olla. Again, another tournament, another match that was hosted in Paraguay. Thankfully, it went off without a hitch. But we saw Talleres win on penalties, which means that we have two Paraguayans winning. We had Blas Riveros and Matias Galarza winning a title over there with Talleres. A big moment for them, obviously, because Talleres aren't really a team that historically have a lot of titles. We're also seeing a lot of good players performing well. Obviously, we spoke about Diego Gomez last week, but here we have Orlando Gil doing so well for San Lorenzo. He's obviously the former Deportivo San Lorenzo player that played in Paraguay, that moved all the way to San Lorenzo in Argentina. So there's a lot of players that are really trying to make Alfaro either second guess himself or try to say, like, okay, the performances have been doing well. Because like Ralph has said, and these are some of the words that stuck to me, that he likes a gamble. So does he take that gamble and go for Orlando Gil being in the call up? I don't know if he's good enough to be the starter, just because even if Gatito Fernandez hasn't demonstrated his form so far of what we saw in the Paraguay national team, I think he's still the undisputed starter. But you have that pressure a little bit from Alfaro, and really him trying to have a big problem in a good way of what players to call up in the next couple of days for these games.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to hear eventually, right, what Gustavo Alfaro thinks about, just the whole process, these last couple of months, and some of these players not playing so much as he thought they would, especially the ones that have made the leap to Europe, right? Julian Cisa with his injury, Ramon Sosa never being a starter in Nottingham Forest, Almiron going back to the MLS, leaving the Premier League. There's been a lot of players that have changed their clubs, and that usually comes also with something, right? I mean, it's part of a process that the players got to go through. But in the middle, you have to come back to the national team, and you got to show your stuff. You got to keep the spot that you earned in the starting team. I want to see if Alfaro keeps all those players out there. Gustavo Velasquez came back to Cerro Porteño. He came back to the local league. He was usually important. He was usually called up. Roberto Fernandez also. He had a couple of bad games, but I think he's going to maintain him in the spot. Orlando Gil might be called up, but that's just to make more room for a young player. Ronaldo de Jesus is another young player that's also on the radar. I think those are the kind of players that Gustavo Alfaro is trying to pick up to see if they can bring something new to the national team to keep everybody motivated also. I think that's great. I think to give these guys a prize after what they're doing. Rolando de Jesus, you could already see that he's ready for it. I mean, physically, he's so important. His presence in defense, we've seen that ever since he went to Lanús. He started playing right away, and I'm really happy for him. Hopefully, he is called up. If not this time, probably in a couple of months, he'll get his opportunity. But he's starting to make room for the young guys, and I kind of like that. He's opening up his options, and we already know most of the squad. I'm really happy with what I saw from Matias Galarza. I almost said Matias Rojas, but he actually missed his penalty. And they were maybe fighting for a spot also in the call-ups, right? I mean, Rojas has not been in Gustavo Alfaro's head that much, but Mati Galarza has won a spot. He had a fantastic game last time in Bolivia. We're not going to have Diego Gomez, I believe, for the first game against Chile. So there's a spot totally open in that midfield. We're going to see new faces, I believe. And I just want to hear Gustavo Alfaro, just what he thinks about all of this, Roberto, because for me, it's Julio Enciso has not played that much. Ramon Sosa has lost his opportunities in Nottingham Forest. I thought he was going to be a starter eventually, and those are my worries right now going forward, right, with this national team. Just the game time that most of these guys are getting.
Yeah, I think game time might be a concern, but one thing that you know is so important to Alfaro is just the kind of group mentality, the psychology behind it, the feeling. And so that's why he's gone and visited so many players. And what I don't think he wants to do is try and rock the boat too much. Like, he's built this group up, he's done so well with it. So like Fede is saying, maybe he adds one or two young players, but he doesn't really want to suddenly shake things up or make too many changes, because that could affect the stability that there's taken so long. Remember, for Paraguayan coaches, different Paraguayan coaches, to try and find, and whatever Alfaro has been doing, he got that like click, that formula, and then the results followed. So I don't think we'll see some huge changes. And from what we saw before, I don't think he's too worried about game time, because he played, for example, Cáceres when he wasn't playing in Lanús, for example. He played him at right back. Gatito wasn't really a starter. He was playing him. So I don't think that's going to weigh too heavily, unless someone comes in really bad shape. But these guys will probably still be keeping pretty fit. And he knows that what he really needs is for them to have maybe like 4 or 5 moments of quality in a game to try and find the goal, in which they're probably going to have 30% possession. The rest is just working off the ball and defending, because you kind of know how we're going to set up in these 2 games, especially against Colombia, which is the away game. So he doesn't need like a super fit team. He just needs a very well organized team, and a team that's going to give their all for 90 minutes in each game. So yeah, we'll see what happens, but I don't think he's going to make huge changes. Maybe one or two new call-ups, and pretty similar 11s to what's been working so far. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Exactly. Like literally, I think you put it right on the nail of the head of the nail. So I think it's really certainly something that, Alfaro will, have to trust his guts really and go with what's worked. If it's already worked for these 6 games, why doesn't it work for the next remaining ones? So yeah, we're gonna have to wait and see, as we're all expectant of that squad. As always, it's gonna be a big debate to talk about within the next week before that game against Chile at the Defensores. I'm excited about it. I'm sure all of you guys that tune in for these games are also excited as well, as we close out another great episode of Guarani Vision. For myself, Roberto Rojas, Fede Perez, and Rob Hanna, thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.